Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Ceci, MLA for Calgary Buffalo and the Municipal Affairs Critic. I'm standing here with the leader of the Alberta NDP, Rachel Notley, and we're standing in front of historic City Hall in Calgary. I want to say we're gathered on the traditional territory of the signatories of Treaty 7, and I acknowledge the Métis people who share a deep connection with this land. Right now, Calgarians are opening their property tax bills. And when we open those bills, we should remember that a good-sized piece of that bill was forced onto families and businesses by the UCP. However, this could have been reduced if the UCP had kept the big city charters we put in place. Our NDP government signed big city charters with Calgary and Edmonton. It took 18 months of tough negotiations with the cities, and the legislation was passed on November 2018. I am proud to be a part of those agreements. Put simply, they are agreements to share a predictable amount of provincial revenues with the cities. In the last election, the UCP made an explicit promise to keep those arrangements in place. But of course, the UCP broke their promise. Travis Toews tore up those agreements in his very first budget. At the same time, the UCP cut funding for the Municipal Sustainability Initiative, and the Grants in Place of Taxes program dramatically increased education property taxes and took a larger piece of fine revenues. This forced this city and others to dramatically increase property taxes. In fact, the UCP's first two budgets almost doubled property tax increases for the city. But they didn't stop there. Instead, they continued to cut in subsequent budgets. So even though the province is enjoying extraordinary resource revenues right now, Calgarians are seeing hundreds of dollars in UCP costs added onto their property tax bills. This is on top of the UCP forcing Alberta to pay more income taxes, more for tuitions, park fees, more for auto insurance, and more for utilities. Calgary continues to struggle with the highest unemployment rate among any major city in the country. And we know our downtown office vacancy rate is about 30%, way too high. And there's increasing concerns about public safety in the downtown. It's clear to everyone that there is no help coming from the UCP. They are engrossed in yet another chapter of infighting and inaction. We need a new government and a new approach. For that new approach, I'll turn it over to Rachel now. Rachel?
Well, thank you very much, Joe. And as Joe said, Alberta families and businesses have a right to demand that their local and provincial governments work together. Passing the buck and pointing the finger, it doesn't make our streets safer, and it doesn't bring down the monthly bills that people across this province, including in Calgary, are being faced with more and more. I was very proud back in November of 2018 when we signed those formal agreements like the Big City Charter to create more stable and predictable funding for the City of Calgary. Our government at the time was focused on affordability, and the city charters were a big part of that effort. But in their first budget, as Joe said, the UCP made several changes that actually increased the cost of living for Albertans. And that includes when Travis Toews and the UCP broke their promise regarding the big city charters and instead decided to tear them up. And here's why we're here today. If that agreement had been kept in place, it would now be starting to pay dividends for the two cities and for their taxpayers. It would essentially be coming into effect right now, and it would have provided much needed relief for Calgarians facing an affordability crisis under this UCP government. Now, everybody who pays property taxes in the City of Calgary can see the price of that broken promise when they open their tax bill. As we all know, and as Joe pointed out, the province is enjoying the revenue of very high global energy prices. But Calgary families and businesses are not feeling the benefit of those extra resources. If our agreement had been left in place, it would mean roughly $97 million in 1 year of extra funding for the city of Calgary. That is the level of cost that the people of Calgary are now paying for the decision of the UCP to break their promise. That kind of money would give City Council the opportunity to lower property taxes on an average home by about $196 per year. Or, put another way, a 9% reduction in your property taxes. Think about it. You're going to be paying a 3.6% increase when you could be paying a 9% decrease in your property taxes right here in Calgary. Or conversely, Calgary could be choosing to use this funding for public safety, for downtown revitalization, for economic diversification, or job creation, or poverty reduction, or so many other things without having to raise taxes to do it. Now, I made the commitment to the Alberta municipalities at their convention very recently, and I will repeat that commitment today. We will restore provincial revenue sharing. An NDP government will be a partner in prosperity with local governments, starting with the big cities. We will keep more money in your community and more money in Albertans' pockets. You know, I've spent a lot of time knocking on doors here in Calgary, over and over again. Families tell me that they are falling farther and farther behind each month. Oil is well above $100 a barrel, but these folks struggle to find a job, or if they have a job, their wages are stagnant while their bills are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Thanks to the UCP, we're paying more income taxes, more tuition, more student loan interest, more camping fees, more electricity rates, more natural gas fees, more car insurance, and today, very clearly, more property taxes. And what I tell people on those doorsteps is that an NDP government will take real action to keep money in your pocket. And this is one example of that. Our promise to be partners in prosperity is a simple way to keep hundreds of dollars in Albertans' pockets. Thank you, and either of us would be very happy to take any questions you might have.
Okay, we'll start with questions in person. Seeing none, we'll move to the lines. Just wanted to use the raise hand function. Go ahead, Shalon, your line should be open. Sorry, try that one more time there, Shalon.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for taking my question. My question is for Rachel Notley. I wanted to get your thoughts on the Pytel policy released from the Premier's office yesterday. I want to get your reaction to it. Do you believe adequate? And if not, what would a policy look like under your NDP government?
Well, I haven't had a chance to look at that policy in tremendous detail yet. What I've heard about it is that it still doesn't guarantee freedom from any kind of recrimination or retribution for the person who raises the complaints, and it doesn't provide for clear processes that must be followed, which of course ultimately undermines the overall principle of natural justice and ensuring that people feel safe to raise their concerns. So I think that it could be improved upon, and obviously what we really want to see is this government be more open about what actually happened, and we want to see Jason Kenney stop fighting the request for him to appear before a judge to provide evidence.
Follow up, Shalon?
Yeah, follow up on the same topic. Speaking of that transparency and openness, I'm hearing criticism that the full summary of Pytel's findings were not released. It was just a summary in this new policy. Kenny says this was done to protect the identities of those involved. Do you believe that we could have seen a full report released in a way that was shielding the identities but allowing the public to really understand the full extent of the problem?
Well, honestly, in a case like this, because there is legal action, I think it's probably the case that it's going to be very difficult to do that. What I do think, however, is that there should be a much clearer and protective policy that holds people accountable for this kind of behavior, and there needs to be a much clearer prohibition on the kind of behavior which generated the dispute in question, as well as the overarching culture that we're hearing about. I think that there might have been some value in doing a report on the culture generally without focusing on the specific matter that's in front of the courts. But it sounds to me like they specifically limited their jurisdiction on that a bit.
Okay, next question goes to Adam McVicker from Global.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure can.
I guess maybe could I just maybe get some background on this revenue sharing? Was this the model that was going to be replacing MSI that was announced back in 2018 or 2017, I believe?
That's exactly it. So MSI was always scheduled to expire at a certain point. And so what we had done, the cities had come to us very early on in our mandate and said that what they would prefer was a very clear revenue sharing agreement that would allow them to predict where their financing and their funding would be going with respect to the province, and also allow them to share in the fiscal prosperity that often comes in Alberta with all the volatility. And so that was a deal that Joe and others and myself spent some time discussing and negotiating with the two big city mayors. And we were very pleased when we brought it into effect in November of 2018, as were they. And at the time, the UCP committed, both in the legislature, I believe, and definitely in the election, that they would respect that agreement. And then the first thing they did after the election was rip up that agreement. And what that means with the state of oil and gas revenues being what they are is that, for instance, in the upcoming year, Calgary is short about $100 million, and the people of Calgary are short about $100 million. And when you consider that a residential property tax accounts for about $1 billion of funding for the city, this is a huge amount of money. And so Albertans, we just want the people of Calgary to understand how much of that bill that they are getting for their property tax right now can be attributed to a decision by Travis Taves and Jason Kenney to break an election promise.
Did you have a follow-up, Adam?
Yes. Just wondering what kind of impact this could have on provincial coffers then, if this program was to this revenue sharing model was to go ahead under your government, because that is quite a lot of money that currently is sitting with the province right now. That I know mayors like Jody Gondek have said needs to be funneled back to municipalities.
Well, I mean, listen, there's ongoing funding transfers between the province and the municipalities under a variety of different heads all the time. The challenge that the cities were sharing with us was that they just didn't have any predictability, and they didn't necessarily have a right to it. And so every single thing had to be negotiated. And so in lieu of the MSI, with its expiration, we agreed on this formula. And whether it's a win or a loss depends to some degree on what's happening with the province's finances. But the cities felt that was a fairer way in the long run to deal with this. And in fact, they agreed to a reduction in MSI in return for it. But of course, that was never returned to them when the province ripped up the agreement. And in fact, MSI was further cut anyway. So. Yes, it would take more money from the provincial government, but it would allow for more predictability between both levels of government, and ultimately more clarity in terms of who's responsible for what projects, and it would allow for a better partnership between the two.
Okay, next question goes to Catherine Gurkowski.
Yeah, thanks very much for taking my question. So as Joe mentioned off the top, the big city charters took 18 months of negotiations, and I mean, since that's been ripped up, the picture has changed. So should you form government again, would you be looking to renegotiate that? Would you be looking to bring back the big city charters as you had them in place? What would that look like?
Well, what we committed to the Alberta Union of Municipalities, or Alberta Municipalities, at their conference, I think it was earlier this spring, Joe? What we committed to them then was that we would, in fact, proceed to negotiate what we referred to as a Partners in Prosperity Agreement with all municipalities. We might well divide up, the way in which we did those negotiations, because obviously there's different interests between very small municipalities and for instance, the two big cities. And obviously the landscape has changed. But we are very committed to going back to the table to provide that kind of negotiated arrangement that would that would deliver to the municipalities the kind of independence and predictability and better partnership that they've been asking for.
Did you follow up, Catherine?
Yeah, and so just to clarify, would you be looking for an overall cities agreement, or would you still want to have that big city agreement done separately to account for some of the specific pressures that Edmonton and Calgary face?
We would ultimately we will do an overall piece that will impact all. But what we learned, because it took a long time to get to where we were, was that there's really significant disparity in interest between the groups, and so we were not that far from an agreement with the smaller cities, and so I think we would have been able to make pretty quick progress if we'd had another 6 to 12 months in government. So we are committed to reaching an agreement with all, but it might look different depending on the sizes of different municipalities.
Okay, we'll do one more pass for questions. And seeing none, that's all for today.
Thank you. Thank you much for watching, and to learn more, check out albertasfuture.ca.